The platform clock showed 11:47 p.m. when Maya realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Her phone battery had died 3 hours ago, leaving her stranded at Westfield Station with nothing but her laptop bag and growing sense of dread. She'd missed the last train home by exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes that now stretched before her like an endless canyon. The station attendant had locked the main building at 11:30, his keys jingling as he walked past her bench without a second glance. Maya had been too absorbed in her work presentation to notice the final boarding call, the conductor's whistle, or the mechanical groan of the last train pulling away from the platform. By the time she looked up, she was alone. Completely alone. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an electric persistence that made her temples throb. Moths gathered around each fixture, casting dancing shadows across the empty concrete. Maya pulled her jacket tighter, though the October night wasn't particularly cold. The chill she felt came from somewhere deeper, somewhere primal that recognized danger and solitude. She walked to the edge of the platform, peering down the tracks that disappeared into perfect darkness. The city skyline glowed faintly in the distance, a reminder of civilization that felt impossibly far away. Behind her, the station stretched out in both directions, a skeleton of metal and concrete that had transformed from mundane to menacing the moment everyone else left. Maya's footsteps echoed as she paced back to the bench. She'd grown up in this city, taken this route hundreds of times, but she'd never been here like this. Never after midnight. Never truly alone. The stories she'd dismissed as urban legends suddenly felt heavier, more possible. Tales of people who vanished from stations, of strange figures who walked the platforms when the trains stopped running, of sounds that couldn't be explained. She sat down hard on the wooden bench, fighting the panic rising in her chest. Her apartment was 14 miles away. Walking wasn't an option, not through neighborhoods she didn't know, not at this hour. The taxi apps wouldn't load without her phone. The station building was locked. She was trapped in this fluorescent limbo until the first train at 5 in the morning. 6 more hours. Maya tried to think logically. She'd waited out. People did this all the time, didn't they? Missed connections, delayed flights, unexpected circumstances. She was safe on a public platform with cameras positioned at every corner. Nothing bad could happen in such a monitored space. But the cameras couldn't help her if something went wrong right now. Who was watching them at midnight? Who would respond if she screamed? The wind picked up, sending a discarded newspaper tumbling along the platform like a ghost doing cartwheels. Maya watched it dance and spin until it wedged itself against a trash can, fluttering weakly. The sound reminded her of breathing, ragged and desperate. She closed her eyes and counted backward from 100, a technique her therapist had taught her for managing anxiety. It helped, slightly. When she opened them again, she noticed how the shadows between the support pillars seemed darker than before, how they appeared to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Maya stood abruptly, deciding that pacing was better than sitting. Movement meant purpose, control. She walked the length of the platform, her shoes clicking rhythmically against the concrete. At the far end, where the platform narrowed and the lights grew dimmer, she stopped. Something felt wrong about going further. She turned back, and that's when she heard it. Footsteps. Not her own. These came from somewhere beyond the platform, echoing through the underpass that connected to the street above. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that grew louder with each second. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she strained to see who was approaching. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against her eardrums, thick and suffocating. Maya held her breath, listening so intently that she could hear the electric hum of the lights, the distant rumble of traffic on the highway, the pulse of blood rushing through her own veins. Then, cutting through the darkness at the far end of the platform, a light appeared. Not the harsh fluorescent glow of the station, but something warmer, softer. A lantern, swinging gently as it moved closer, illuminating the silhouette of someone walking toward her through the shadows. Maya's first instinct was to run, but her legs felt rooted to the concrete. The lantern swayed rhythmically as the figure approached, casting long shadows that stretched and contracted like living things. She couldn't make out any features, just a dark outline moving with unhurried certainty through the pools of light and darkness. Her mind raced through possibilities. A maintenance worker? But why would they carry an old-fashioned lantern instead of a flashlight? A security guard? The station had been abandoned for hours. Someone dangerous? Her throat tightened at the thought. The figure emerged into the brighter section of the platform, and Maya felt her panic shift into confusion. It was an elderly woman, perhaps in her 70s, dressed in a long wool coat that looked decades out of fashion. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried a brass lantern that belonged in a museum or a period film. The warm light illuminated her weathered face, revealing kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Missed the last one, did you?" the woman asked, her voice carrying clearly across the platform despite being barely above a conversational tone. Maya nodded, unable to find her voice immediately. The woman's presence was so unexpected, so utterly out of place, that it took several seconds for her brain to process what she was seeing. "Happens more often than you'd think," the woman continued, moving closer with slow, measured steps. "I'm Margaret. I work here, in a manner of speaking, making sure stranded travelers don't spend the whole night in fear." "I didn't see you earlier," Maya managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "The station closed. The attendant locked up." Margaret smiled, and something about that smile was both comforting and unsettling. There are aspects of this station that operate on different schedules. Some services aren't listed on the departure boards. Maya glanced at the lantern again. "That's an unusual choice for lighting. Batteries die. Electricity fails. But a good flame, properly tended, keeps burning." Margaret set the lantern down on the bench between them, the glass panels glowing with steady warmth. "I've been keeping watch over this station for longer than most people remember it exists. You're safe here, child. But you're right to be cautious." The words should have been reassuring, but something in the way Margaret spoke made Maya's skin prickle. There was a weight to her sentences, a knowing quality that suggested she understood things Maya couldn't see. "What do you mean, I'm right to be cautious?" Maya asked. Margaret settled onto the bench with a soft sigh, her bones creaking audibly. Stations are peculiar places. Thresholds between destinations, neither here nor there. When the trains stop running and the crowds disappear, the boundaries grow thin. Things slip through that shouldn't. People who aren't entirely people. Moments that don't quite belong to now. Maya felt her skepticism rising despite her fear. "That sounds like ghost stories." "Does it?" Margaret's eyes reflected the lantern light, making them seem to glow. "Tell me, Maya, why did you miss your train tonight?" Maya froze. "I didn't tell you my name." "You didn't have to. Your badge is clipped to your bag. Maya Rodriguez, senior analyst at Carver and Mills." Margaret pointed with a gnarled finger. "But that's not what I asked. Why did you miss the train?" Maya looked down at her company badge, then back at Margaret. The explanation felt foolish now, but she answered anyway. "I was working. Lost track of time on a presentation." "A presentation that couldn't wait until tomorrow?" "My boss needs it for a 9 a.m. meeting." Margaret nodded slowly. "And if you'd caught that train, you would have arrived home safely. You would have finished your slides, slept for 4 hours, and delivered your presentation with bags under your eyes and coffee in your veins. Your boss would have barely glanced at your work before focusing on his own agenda. In 3 months, no one would remember that presentation existed." The accuracy stung. Maya knew it was true. She'd sacrificed sleep, health, and now apparently her safety for work that mattered only in the smallest, most temporary ways. "So instead," Margaret continued, "the universe gave you this night. This moment. A chance to step outside the pattern you've been following." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old thermos. "Tea? It's still warm." Maya accepted the cup Margaret poured, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The tea smelled of chamomile and something else, something she couldn't identify but found deeply calming. She took a sip, and tension she hadn't realized she was carrying began to ease from her shoulders. "You mentioned things slipping through," Maya said quietly. "What kind of things?" Margaret's expression grew serious. "This station has history. Dark history. 12 years ago, a young woman named Rebecca Chen waited on this very platform for a train that never came. She vanished sometime between midnight and dawn. The cameras showed her sitting alone, and then, between one frame and the next, she was gone. No footsteps, no struggle, nothing." Maya set down her cup, her hand trembling slightly. "They never found her?" "They found her 3 days later, wandering the streets with no memory of where she'd been. She could never quite explain what happened, only that she'd followed someone into the darkness between the platforms. Someone who promised to show her the way home." The platform suddenly felt colder. Maya glanced around, seeing the shadows differently now. "Since then," Margaret said, "I've made it my business to keep watch. To make sure no one else follows the wrong light into the wrong place." The station clock now read 12:34 a.m., though Maya could have sworn only 15 minutes had passed since Margaret arrived. Time felt elastic here, stretching and compressing in ways that made her increasingly uneasy. She studied the old woman more carefully, noting details that didn't quite add up. Margaret's clothing, while vintage, showed no signs of wear. Her shoes were polished to perfection, not a scuff or crease visible. The lantern she carried burned with absolute steadiness, the flame never flickering despite the wind that periodically swept across the platform. And her eyes, when the light caught them just right, seemed to hold depths that no ordinary person's eyes should contain. "You're not really a station employee, are you?" Maya asked, surprised by her own boldness. Margaret's smile widened. "I never said I was. I said I work here in a manner of speaking. There are many kinds of work, many kinds of employment. Some positions aren't listed in any official capacity." "Then what are you?" "Someone who remembers. Someone who watches. Someone who stands at the boundary and makes sure travelers find their right paths." Margaret picked up the lantern and stood, gesturing for Maya to follow. "Walk with me. There's something you need to understand about this place." Against her better judgment, Maya followed. They walked toward the darker end of the platform, past the benches and the vending machines, past the point where Maya had stopped earlier. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer here, their buzz growing fainter with each step. "Every station exists in two states simultaneously," Margaret explained as they walked. "The ordinary world knows it as concrete and metal, schedules and tickets. But there's another layer, visible only to those who find themselves stranded at the wrong hour. In that layer, stations are doorways. Passages. Places where the membrane between what is and what could be grows dangerously thin." They reached the end of the platform, where a metal barrier blocked further progress. Beyond it, the tracks curved away into absolute darkness. Margaret raised the lantern, and in its light, Maya saw something impossible. The darkness beyond the barrier wasn't empty. Shapes moved within it, silhouettes that seemed to be waiting. Some looked almost human, others decidedly less so. They swayed and shifted, pressing against an invisible boundary, unable or unwilling to cross onto the illuminated platform. "They're always there," Margaret said softly. "Drawn to places like this, where people feel lost and vulnerable. They feed on fear, on desperation, on the panic that comes with being alone in the dark. If I wasn't here with this light, they'd already be whispering to you. Promising help. Offering shortcuts. Suggesting you follow them to safety." Maya's legs felt weak. She grabbed the metal barrier for support, unable to tear her eyes from the shapes in the darkness. One of them, taller than the rest, turned what might have been a head in her direction. She felt its attention like a physical weight. "Rebecca followed one of them," Maya whispered. "She did. And she was lucky to come back at all, even without her memories. Others haven't been so fortunate." Margaret lowered the lantern slightly, and the shapes retreated into deeper shadow. "The station keeps records of people who've gone missing from platforms across this city. 17 in the past 30 years. Most were found eventually, but they were never the same. Something essential had been taken from them, some core part of themselves traded away for false promises." Maya forced herself to look away from the darkness. "Why are you telling me this? Why show me?" "Because you need to understand what you're facing. The night isn't over yet, and my protection only extends so far." Margaret began walking back toward the brighter section of platform, and Maya hurried to follow, desperate not to be left near that darkness alone. "They'll try to reach you before dawn. They always do. They'll use voices you recognize, faces you trust, memories you cherish. They'll offer you exactly what you want most in this moment." "And what's that?" "A way out. A train that shouldn't exist. A person who offers a ride. A path through the station that promises a shortcut to safety." Margaret stopped at the bench where they'd first met and set the lantern down again. "When those offers come, you must refuse them. No matter how convincing they seem, no matter how desperately you want to accept. The only safe path is to wait for the first scheduled train at 5 a.m. Not a minute sooner." Maya sank onto the bench, her mind reeling. Part of her wanted to dismiss everything Margaret said as elaborate nonsense, the ravings of a confused old woman. But the shapes in the darkness had been real. She'd seen them, felt their hunger. "How do I know you're not one of them?" she asked suddenly. "How do I know you're not offering me a false path right now?" Margaret laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "That's the right question to ask. The wise question. Trust nothing completely, especially not in a place like this." She pulled something from her pocket and pressed it into Maya's hand. It was a small, smooth stone, warm to the touch. "But if I were one of them, you wouldn't be able to hold this. It's iron-bearing hematite. They can't tolerate it. Keep it with you, and you'll be able to tell the real from the false. Maya closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its weight, its reality. It anchored her somehow, made the world feel slightly more solid. What happens now? She asked. Margaret looked up at the station clock. Now we wait. And we watch. And when they come for you, as they surely will, we face them together. The next hour passed in eerie quiet. Margaret sat beside Maya on the bench, the lantern glowing steadily between them, creating a circle of warm light that felt increasingly like a fortress against the surrounding darkness. They talked about small things, ordinary things. Margaret shared stories about the city's history, about the station when it first opened in 1952, about the countless travelers who'd passed through these platforms over the decades. But Maya noticed that Margaret kept glancing toward the shadows, her body language betraying a tension that contradicted her casual conversation. The old woman was watching for something, waiting for something, and that vigilance made Maya's own anxiety spike. At 1:47 a.m., the temperature dropped suddenly. Maya's breath became visible in the air, small clouds of condensation that dissipated slowly. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, but their glow seemed weaker somehow, less able to push back the darkness. They're getting closer, Margaret murmured. Hold tight to that stone. Maya gripped the hematite so hard it hurt. The pain helped her focus, kept her grounded in physical reality. She scanned the platform, trying to see what Margaret sensed, but everything looked the same as before. Empty benches, abandoned newspaper, darkened station building. Then she heard it. A phone ringing. Her head snapped toward the sound. It was coming from inside the locked station building, the familiar tone of her own ringtone echoing through the empty space. But that was impossible. Her phone was dead. She'd watched the battery die hours ago. Don't respond, Margaret said sharply. It's not real. The ringing continued, insistent, demanding. Maya felt the pull of it, the automatic urge to answer that years of conditioning had embedded in her nervous system. What if it was important? What if someone needed her? What if it was her mother, who sometimes called late when she couldn't sleep, worried about her daughter living alone in the city? Maya, look at me. Margaret's hand gripped her wrist. That's not your phone. That's not anyone's phone. It's a law. The moment you move toward it, you'll leave the light's protection. Maya tore her gaze away from the station building and focused on Margaret's face. The old woman's expression was fierce, protective. The ringing stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. Good, Margaret said. You passed the first test. Maya's laugh came out shaky. First? How many will there be? As many as it takes. They're creative, patient. They've been doing this far longer than you've been alive. Minutes crawled by. Maya found herself counting the seconds, marking time by the pulse in her own wrist. She was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline now, her body demanding sleep while her mind refused to allow even a moment of unconsciousness. At 2:23 a.m., she heard footsteps again. These came from the opposite end of the platform, heavy and measured, accompanied by the sound of wheels rolling across concrete. Maya looked up to see a maintenance worker pushing a cleaning cart, moving methodically along the platform toward them. He was young, maybe 30, wearing a standard blue uniform with the City Transit logo on his chest. Everything about him appeared completely normal, from his work boots to his reflective vest. He whistled tunelessly as he worked, emptying trash cans and sweeping debris. Evening, he said cheerfully as he approached their bench. Didn't expect to see anyone here this late. You ladies waiting for the special service? Maya felt Margaret's hand tighten on her arm, a warning. She clutched the hematite stone and felt it growing warm in her palm. What special service? Maya asked carefully. The worker grinned. The express line. Runs between the regular hours for night shift workers and insomniacs. Doesn't show on the regular schedule, but it'll get you home in half the time. Should be here in about 5 minutes if you want to head down to platform 3. Maya's heart leaped. A train. A way home. Exactly what she'd been desperately wanting for the past 3 hours. She started to stand, but Margaret's grip became iron strong. Platform 3 has been closed for renovations for 6 months, Margaret said, her voice cold. And there is no special service. There hasn't been for 12 years, not since the budget cuts. The worker's smile didn't waver, but something changed in his eyes. They caught the lantern light strangely, reflecting it back like an animal's eyes in headlights. You're mistaken. I work this shift every night. I know the schedule. Show me your badge, Margaret demanded. The worker's hand moved to his chest, where an ID badge should have been clipped. His fingers touched only fabric. The smile finally faltered. I must have left it in my locker. The hematite, Margaret said to Maya. Hold it toward him. Maya extended her hand, the stone resting on her palm. The worker's eyes fixed on it, and his expression transformed from friendly to something primal and hungry. He took a step backward, then another, his form seeming to blur slightly at the edges. You'll regret this, he said, his voice no longer quite human. The night is long, and she's so tired. Eventually she'll make a mistake. Eventually she'll follow the wrong light. He turned and walked away, pushing the cleaning cart. Within seconds, both he and the cart had dissolved into the shadows like mist burning away in sunlight. The cart's wheels left no tracks on the platform's dusty surface. Maya's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the stone. That thing knew I was tired. It knew exactly what to offer. They always do, Margaret said grimly. They read your thoughts, your fears, your desires. They shape themselves into whatever you most want to see, offer whatever you most need to hear. That's what makes them so dangerous. How many more? Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Until dawn, Margaret replied. They're getting desperate now. They know time is running short. The closer we get to sunrise, the more aggressive they'll become. Maya looked at the station clock, 2:34 a.m. 2.5 more hours until the first train. 2.5 more hours of resisting temptation, fighting exhaustion, maintaining her grip on reality while surrounded by things that wanted to pull her into darkness. She'd never felt more alone or more grateful for Margaret's presence beside her. Why are you helping me? Maya asked suddenly. What do you get out of this? Margaret's expression softened. I'm here because someone should be. Because Rebecca Chen had no one, and look what happened to her. Because every person who stands on this platform alone deserves a fighting chance against what lurks in the shadows. But you're not just some good Samaritan. There's something more. Something you're not telling me. The old woman was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old grief. I had a daughter once. Sarah. She loved trains, loved traveling. One night she missed her connection at a station across the city. I told her to wait, to be safe, to trust no strangers. She called me scared, said someone was offering her a ride. I told her not to take it, but the call dropped. By the time I got there, Margaret trailed off. Maya understood. The things in the dark. She followed them willingly, thinking they were help. I found her body 3 days later. She'd walked into the maintenance tunnels, into spaces no one should ever enter, chasing voices that promised safety. Margaret picked up the lantern, its light seeming to burn brighter. So now I watch. I protect. I make sure no other mother loses her daughter to the darkness between platforms. The final hours were the hardest. Maya's exhaustion had reached the point where reality itself felt negotiable, where the boundaries between what was real and what wasn't seemed increasingly arbitrary. She saw things moving in her peripheral vision that vanished when she looked directly at them. She heard voices calling her name in tones that sounded almost exactly like her mother, her best friend, her college roommate who died in a car accident 5 years ago. Margaret stayed vigilant beside her, the lantern never dimming, her presence a constant anchor to reality. But Maya could see the toll it was taking on the old woman too. Lines of exhaustion had deepened around Margaret's eyes, and she moved more stiffly, as though each minute added years to her already considerable age. At 3:45 a.m., the most convincing temptation appeared. The platform speakers crackled to life, and a perfectly normal automated voice announced, the 3:50 a.m. special service to downtown stations will be arriving on Platform 2 in 5 minutes. This train makes all stops. Please stand behind the yellow line. Maya heard it clearly. The same voice that announced trains every day, mechanical and impersonal but utterly familiar. She stood automatically, muscle memory taking over, her tired brain accepting the announcement without question. Maya, no. Margaret struggled to her feet, blocking her path. There is no 3:50 train. The first service is at 5 a.m. You know this. But I heard it. The announcement system. That's real. That's not something they can fake. Even as Maya said it, doubt crept in. But she was so tired. So desperate to go home, to sleep, to escape this nightmare night. They can fake anything, Margaret insisted. They can mimic any sound, any voice, any system. The stone, Maya. Check with the stone. Maya held the hematite, but her hand was trembling so badly she could barely feel its warmth. Her eyes were drawn to Platform 2, where lights had begun to appear in the distance. Twin headlights, growing brighter, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of an approaching train. The rumble of wheels on tracks, the mechanical breathing of brakes, the electrical hum of modern rail systems. It sounded exactly like a real train. It looked exactly like a real train. What if you're wrong? Maya heard herself say. What if this one is real? What if I send it away and I'm stuck here for another hour? Then you wait another hour, Margaret said firmly. Better to wait in safety than rush toward danger. Maya, look at the station board. Look at the actual schedule. Maya forced her eyes to the electronic departure board. It was dark, had been dark all night, showing no scheduled services until 5 a.m. But the train was getting closer. She could see it now, a sleek modern railcar, its windows glowing with warm inviting light. Through those windows, she could see other passengers. Normal people, reading phones, dozing in their seats, living their ordinary lives. I can see people on it, Maya whispered. Real people. You see what they want you to see. Margaret moved to block her view of the approaching train. Maya Rodriguez, listen to me. I have been keeping watch over this station for 17 years. I know every train, every schedule, every legitimate service. That is not a real train. If you board it, you will not arrive at your destination. You will disappear into the spaces between stations, into the places where the lost ones go. The train was slowing now, approaching platform 2. Maya could hear the pneumatic hiss of doors preparing to open. A few more seconds and those doors would slide apart, inviting her to step aboard, to end this endless night. Her phone suddenly buzzed in her pocket. Impossible. Her phone was dead. But she could feel it, the familiar vibration pattern of an incoming call. She pulled it out with shaking hands and saw her mother's face on the screen, the phone showing a full battery and perfect signal. Mom, she said, answering automatically. Sweetheart? Where are you? I've been so worried. Her mother's voice, exactly right, filled with exactly the right mix of concern and relief. I'm at the station. I drove in to pick you up. I'm parked right outside. Just come up the stairs and you'll see my car. Tears sprang to Maya's eyes. Her mother. Her real mother, who would absolutely drive an hour in the middle of the night to rescue her stranded daughter. It made perfect sense. Why hadn't she thought to call her mother earlier? Because your phone was dead, a small voice in her head insisted. Because this isn't real. Just come upstairs, honey. It's cold out here and I want to get you home. Maya looked at Margaret, who was staring at her with an expression of deep sorrow. The old woman knew. She could see Maya wavering, see her resolve crumbling. It's my mom, Maya said, her voice breaking. She came to get me. It's not your mother, Margaret said gently. Check the stone, Maya. One last time. Please. Maya held the phone in one hand and the hematite in the other. She brought them closer together. The stone began to burn, actually burn, scorching her palm. The phone screen flickered, and for just a moment, she saw something else reflected in its surface. Not her mother's face, but something ancient and hungry, something that wore faces like masks. She dropped the phone. It hit the concrete and shattered, but instead of circuit boards and glass, it dissolved into black smoke that writhed for a moment before dispersing. Behind her, on platform 2, the train's doors opened with an inviting chime. But when Maya turned to look, really look, she saw that the passengers in those windows weren't moving. They sat frozen, their eyes empty, their expressions slack. They weren't passengers at all. They were hollow shells, puppets, lures designed to make the trap seem legitimate. I see it now, Maya said, her voice steadier. I see what they are. The train sat there for another minute, doors open, waiting. When Maya didn't board, when she turned her back on it completely and sat down beside Margaret again, it began to change. The warm light inside flickered and died. The sleek modern exterior tarnished and corroded before her eyes, revealing something underneath that had never been a train at all. Something organic and wrong, something that had only been masquerading as metal and wheels. Then it was gone, vanishing like it had never existed. The platform fell silent except for the eternal buzz of the fluorescent lights. Maya and Margaret sat together on the bench, the lantern glowing between them, and waited. At 4:47 a.m., the darkness began to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, like a slow exhale. The shadows retreated to their normal places. The temperature rose slightly. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on the platform for hours lifted, and Maya could breathe fully for what felt like the first time all night. At 4:58 a.m., real lights appeared down the tracks. Real headlights, accompanied by the genuine sound of an approaching train. Maya checked the departure board, which had flickered back to life, showing the 5 a.m. service to downtown stations. "This one is real," Margaret confirmed, standing slowly. "You can go home now." The train pulled into the station, perfectly ordinary, perfectly normal. The doors opened, revealing a handful of bleary-eyed early-morning commuters. Real people with real lives, yawning and checking their phones, oblivious to the battle that had been fought on this platform hours earlier. Maya stood to board, then hesitated. "Will you be here? Next time someone gets stranded?" Margaret smiled, and in the growing dawn light, she looked different. Younger somehow, or perhaps just more peaceful. "I'll be here. I'm always here. It's what I do." "Thank you," Maya said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You saved my life tonight." "You saved your own life," Margaret replied. "I just held the light." The choice to resist, to wait, to trust in the truth despite temptation, that was all you. Maya boarded the train, finding a seat by the window. As it pulled away from the station, she looked back at platform 1. Margaret stood there, the lantern in her hand, waving. Then the train turned, and she was gone. Maya arrived home at 5:47 a.m. She immediately plugged in her phone and watched it come back to life. There were no missed calls, no messages from her mother, no evidence of the call she'd answered in the night. She checked the news, searched for reports of missing persons at Westfield Station, and found Rebecca Chen's story exactly as Margaret had described it. She never worked late enough to risk missing the last train again. And on the rare occasions when she passed through Westfield Station after dark, she always looked for a woman with a lantern, keeping watch over the platforms, protecting travelers from the things that lurked in the darkness between the lights. She never saw Margaret again, but somehow, she knew the old woman was still there. Still watching. Still holding the light against the dark. And that knowledge, more than anything else, helped Maya sleep soundly every night, knowing that there were protectors standing guard at the thin places where ordinary reality met something darker, making sure the lost found their way home. The end.